June 6, 1944, dawned over the fields of Normandy with a heavy mist that rolled over the hedgerows, softening the jagged outlines of craters and debris from previous skirmishes. The air was thick with the smell of wet earth, oil, and distant smoke curling from bombed-out farmhouses, mingling with a metallic tang of early morning dew on rusted machinery. Massive German panzer columns rumbled through the countryside, their treads gouging deep tracks into the muddy fields, each tank a towering fortress of steel and firepower. The crews inside these armored giants were confident, their eyes scanning for enemy infantry, but unaware of the small, nimble threats lying in wait. Across the fields, Allied soldiers moved with calculated caution, every footstep muted against the wet grass. Bazooka teams, often overlooked by the Germans, slid behind hedgerows, tree trunks, and shattered walls, their weapons primed and ready. The men knew the risks. A single misstep could turn them into instant targets. Yet their nerves were steel-strong, honed by training and the understanding that the fate of their comrades might hinge on their accuracy and timing. The panzer crews, arrogant and conditioned by years of battlefield dominance, laughed at the thought of a few infantrymen armed with what they considered toy shoulder-fired rockets incapable of harming their armored beasts. Little did they know, these seemingly insignificant weapons carried the power to alter the course of the day. Every rustle of grass, every faint shadow along a hedgerow, was a signal of the quiet storm that was about to erupt, a storm that would challenge the very confidence and tactics of the most feared tanks in the German arsenal. The tension in the morning air was almost palpable, a prelude to a clash that would prove that in warfare, size and steel alone do not determine victory. German overconfidence. June 6, 1944. By mid-morning, the German panzer crews were moving confidently through the crisscrossing hedgerows and battered fields of Normandy. The morning fog had begun to lift, revealing long stretches of open farmland punctuated by shattered barns, twisted fences, and the occasional plume of smoke from Allied artillery strikes. Inside their armored behemoths, the crews carried themselves with a sense of assured superiority. Years of training, victories in Poland, France, and the Eastern Front, and the imposing firepower of the Panzer IV and Tiger tanks had ingrained a belief: the battlefield belonged to steel and speed. They glanced down the hedgerows, spotting small groups of infantry and lightly armed teams moving cautiously along the muddy paths. A few crewmen chuckled as they waved at bazooka teams, dismissing them as harmless nuisances. The 60mm and 88mm cannons of their panzers, capable of punching through nearly any Allied armor, made the idea of shoulder-fired rockets seem laughably inadequate. "Little toys," one officer muttered, tightening his gloves on the steering levers as he watched a bazooka operator duck behind a hedge. Yet this overconfidence had a dangerous edge. The crews failed to see the smaller shadows in the field. The bazooka teams crouched low, observing tank tracks, wind direction, and distance to weak points. They ignored the signs of careful preparation, assuming the American infantry were untrained, poorly equipped, and incapable of threatening their metallic giants. The panzer columns rumbled forward, their engines growling with authority, each tank a symbol of brute force, unaware that in the coming minutes, this arrogance would meet a weapon designed to exploit even the smallest crack in their armor. Every confident glance and mocking gesture was a step closer to the shock that would rewrite their assumptions about what infantry could achieve against tanks. First bazooka strike, June 6, 1944. The morning tension was shattered by a sudden, sharp crack, a noise that, at first, seemed insignificant against the rumble of panzer engines and distant artillery. Hidden in a shallow ditch, a young American soldier pressed the smooth metallic tube of the M1 Bazooka against his shoulder. His fingers trembled slightly on the trigger, heart pounding in sync with the distant roar of the battlefield. Around him, his squad remained motionless, blending into the uneven terrain, eyes fixed on the looming silhouette of the German panzer column advancing confidently through the fields. He exhaled slowly, recalling the training that had drilled into him the precise angles, the ideal distance, and the weak points in the panzer's armor. The first target, a medium Panzer IV, loomed just beyond a hedge. He aimed carefully at the side, where the armor was thinner, where the metal offered less protection against the M6 rocket. The world seemed to slow, the distant chirp of a bird, the creak of a nearby fence, even the low hiss of engine exhaust faded into silence as he squeezed the trigger. A fiery rocket streaked through the humid morning air, leaving a bright, smoking trail that cut across the panzer's steel flank. Impact. A sudden violent eruption of sparks and flame spattered against the side armor. The tank lurched, smoke curling from a ruptured fuel line, and the crew inside scrambled, their confident expressions giving way to panic. Nearby Panzers ground to a halt as crews shouted and ducked behind hatches, trying to comprehend the sudden vulnerability of their unstoppable machines. From the ditch, the bazooka operator felt a surge of adrenaline and disbelief at the effectiveness of his weapon. His squad, emboldened by the success, prepared their own bazookas, taking careful aim at the next tank. The German crews, still reeling from the unexpected strike, had no time to regroup before another rocket streaked toward them, striking a Tiger tank at its side. A low metallic groan of twisted armor echoed across the field, followed by the acrid scent of burning hydraulic fluid and smoke. For the first time that day, the Panzer crews realized that the so-called infantry toys were no mere nuisance. They were capable of dismantling entire columns if deployed with precision and courage. The quiet confidence that had accompanied them through decades of armored warfare began to crack, replaced by confusion, fear, and a grudging respect for the small but deadly bazooka teams hidden in the Normandy hedgerows. Every rocket fired was a lesson in vulnerability, a shocking reminder that even the mightiest steel giants could fall to the ingenuity and resolve of a determined soldier. The battlefield had shifted in a heartbeat, and the German crews would never underestimate the bazooka again. Coordinated Bazooka Assault, June 6, 1944. By mid-morning, the once confident German panzer column had slowed, their engines sputtering through churned mud as crews peered anxiously from hatches, scanning the hedgerows for threats. Hidden among the dense Normandy foliage, American bazooka teams moved with precision, each squad silently signaling their positions with subtle gestures. The battlefield had transformed into a deadly chessboard, and every rustle of leaves or flicker of sunlight through the branches was a cue for action. The first team, positioned near a crumbled stone wall, unleashed another rocket in perfect timing, striking a Panzer IV squarely on its side. Flames erupted, smoke billowing high, blackening the morning sky. The deafening crack of metal splitting and fuel igniting echoed across the fields. German crews ducked behind hatches, fumbling with radios, shouting orders that barely pierced the chaos. Meanwhile, a second bazooka team had maneuvered to a flanking position, taking aim at a Tiger tank several hundred meters away. The rocket streaked like a fiery arrow through the mist, slamming into the tank's thinner side armor, producing a shower of sparks and a violent shudder that threw the crew inside off balance. The third team, hidden near a hedgerow intersection, coordinated with the first two through hand signals and shouted cues, timing their fire to strike simultaneously. The synchronized attacks created confusion among the German ranks, breaking the disciplined formation that had once seemed impenetrable. Tanks swerved to avoid rockets, wheels spinning in mud, only to find another bazooka round descending from the other flank. Smoke, fire, and the acrid smell of scorched metal filled the air, mingling with the earthy scent of Normandy fields turned into a war-torn landscape. American soldiers moved with silent determination, using each strike to cover the next, advancing inch by inch while keeping their small but potent weapons aimed at critical weak points. Each panzer that was hit became a symbol of the shifting tides of war, proof that teamwork, strategy, and precision could overcome raw firepower. German crews, once confident in their armored dominance, now scrambled to regroup, their movements frantic, their coordination fractured. By the time the sun reached its zenith, the coordinated bazooka assault had shattered the panzer column's cohesion. Tanks burned or stalled, crews abandoned their vehicles, and the once dominant armored force was reduced to chaos. Hidden in the hedgerows, American soldiers watched with tense anticipation, ready to exploit every crack, every misstep, every exposure in the enemy line. The battlefield had changed. The myth of Panzer invincibility had been irrevocably challenged by the ingenuity and courage of the bazooka teams. The success of the coordinated assault wasn't just in the destruction of tanks, it was psychological. German soldiers realized that no formation, no armor, no reputation could fully shield them from the relentless precision of these small mobile teams. The bazooka had transformed the battlefield, proving that with courage, planning, and coordination, even the mightiest steel giants could be humbled by the determination of a few brave men. German panic and retreat, June 6, 1944. By late morning, the German panzer crew's initial overconfidence had evaporated entirely. The battlefield was a chaotic mosaic of fire, smoke, and overturned vehicles. Tanks that had once moved with mechanical precision now lurched unpredictably through mud and craters, engines coughing under the strain of sudden damage. The deafening roar of rocket impacts continued, each explosion further eroding the nerve of the soldiers inside. Officers shouted orders that were drowned out by the cries of panicked crews and the mechanical groans of damaged tanks. Radio communications failed as frantic attempts to coordinate the surviving vehicles collided with the relentless strikes of hidden bazooka teams. Some Panzers attempted to turn and flee, but narrow country roads clogged with debris and burning hulks slowed every retreat. The once mighty armored column had fractured into isolated pockets, each struggling to survive the relentless assault. From behind the safety of hedgerows and broken stone walls, American bazooka teams observed the unfolding chaos with tense determination. They repositioned silently, using smoke and fire from previous hits as cover, ready to strike any Panzer that faltered. Even Tiger tanks, feared for their heavy armor and firepower, were forced into defensive maneuvers, their commanders realizing too late that agility and precision could neutralize brute force. German soldiers' faces reflected the growing terror and the realization that their reputation, their careful planning, and their superior armor could not guarantee survival. Tanks were abandoned mid-field, crews scrambling to reach cover as rockets tore through remaining formations. The orderly, disciplined force that had rolled confidently across Europe was now reduced to fragmented units, each trying to escape, each vulnerable to the patient, coordinated strikes of the bazooka teams. The countryside echoed with the sounds of collapse, twisted metal, fires consuming what had been formidable war machines, and the frantic footsteps of men seeking refuge. Dust, smoke, and the acrid scent of burning fuel mingled with the muddy scent of trampled Normandy fields, creating a sensory testament to the battlefield's upheaval. The psychological impact on the Germans was immediate and profound. The shock of witnessing an entire armored column falter at the hands of small, determined squads would linger long after the smoke cleared. By the time the afternoon sun cast long shadows over the battered field, the retreating German forces had lost cohesion entirely. Survivors regrouped behind makeshift defensive lines, wary of every rustle in the hedgerows, aware now that the American bazooka teams could strike again at any moment. The myth of Panzer invincibility was shattered not just physically, but mentally. The battlefield had proven that strategic use of mobility, coordination, and firepower could upend even the most formidable armored formations. American Tactical Brilliance, June 6, 1944. As the dust and smoke of the battlefield swirled around the shattered Panzer column, American bazooka teams demonstrated the ingenuity and tactical foresight that had turned the tide of the engagement. Every squad moved with purpose, using the natural terrain hedgerows, sunken roads, and scattered ruins to mask their positions. Each movement was calculated, a delicate balance of stealth and aggression, ensuring that the Germans remained disoriented and vulnerable. The bazooka teams coordinated their attacks with near-precision timing. One squad would draw enemy attention with a well-placed shot at the lead Panzer, forcing the column to slow and bunch together. Another squad, positioned behind the hedgerow or in a shallow depression, would then target the central or rear tanks. Rockets streaked through the air with a sharp hiss, striking armor with explosive precision. Smoke and sparks erupted upon impact, and the reverberation of the blasts across the countryside sent tremors through the remaining German vehicles. The American squads had rehearsed these tactics relentlessly. Each member knew the importance of communication, visual cues, and timing. A subtle hand signal could indicate fire now or move left, allowing multiple squads to strike simultaneously without revealing their positions prematurely. The effectiveness of this coordination lay not only in firepower but in psychological warfare. Panzer crews were constantly forced to react, unsure where the next deadly projectile would come from. Even with limited numbers, the Americans leveraged the full potential of the bazooka, combining agility, surprise, and precision. Infantry advances were synchronized with rocket fire, and teams would quickly relocate after every salvo to avoid return fire. This mobility frustrated German gunners, who struggled to aim at targets that were never in the same place for long. Tank formations that had once relied on cohesion and armor dominance were now fragmented, their advance slowed and repeatedly checked by small, yet lethal squads of determined soldiers. From a command perspective, the brilliance was evident. Officers on both sides recognized the unfolding lesson: raw firepower alone could not dominate the battlefield. It required strategy, innovation, and understanding of both enemy weaknesses and terrain advantages. The American Bazooka squads became the embodiment of this principle, proving that tactical ingenuity could compensate for numerical or technological disparities. As the sun climbed higher, the cumulative effect of these tactics was undeniable. German panzers lay scattered, some ablaze, others immobilized, and the remaining crews demoralized and hesitant. The American forces, though relatively light in armor and numbers, had transformed the battlefield into a controlled, lethal environment, demonstrating how ingenuity and careful planning could overturn even the most formidable threats. The stage was set for the next phase of the engagement, where continued coordination and tactical brilliance would ensure that every bazooka team maximized its deadly impact. Coordinated strikes and squad synergy, June 6, 1944. By mid-morning, the battlefield had transformed into a chaotic, smoke-choked maze of overturned panzer columns and scorched earth. American bazooka squads, small in number but immense in impact, exemplified coordination and synergy that turned each engagement into a meticulously orchestrated operation. Every soldier moved not as an individual, but as part of a living, breathing system where timing, position, and communication determined survival and lethality. The squads advanced in staggered formations, using hedgerows, shell craters, and scattered debris as both cover and staging points. One team would fire on the lead tank, freezing the German drivers into defensive hesitation. Simultaneously, a second squad, positioned to the flanks or rear, prepared to launch rockets at immobilized targets. The timing had to be perfect. Too early, and the enemy would scatter. Too late, and the first target would recover, reducing the opportunity for multiple strikes. Every bazooka operator relied on subtle hand signals, whistle cues, or prearranged visual markers to coordinate attacks, allowing squads to remain hidden while maintaining lethal precision. Smoke from previous rocket hits obscured lines of sight, but trained eyes scanned constantly for movement. The interlocking fields of fire created a deadly web, forcing German panzers to hesitate at every turn. Each strike was calculated not just for damage, but to break the rhythm and morale of enemy tank crews. The psychological impact was as profound as the physical damage. German tank commanders, who had once relied on armored superiority, now faced an invisible network of threat. Every maneuver turning a turret, adjusting speed, or attempting a counterattack was met with instantaneous, coordinated bazooka fire. The synergy between squads allowed American infantry to cover each other's blind spots, ensuring that even if one team was pinned down, another could deliver a crippling strike. Coordination extended beyond the battlefield lines. Squad leaders relayed observations and adjusted positions in real time, anticipating enemy responses and exploiting weaknesses in formation. Flanking movements were calculated to draw enemy fire into kill zones, while other squads struck immobilized or distracted targets. It was a dance of death and strategy, executed with the discipline of seasoned professionals despite the small size of each unit. By the end of this coordinated onslaught, the effect was unmistakable. Entire panzer columns had been fragmented, tanks immobilized or ablaze, and German crews demoralized and confused. The synergy between bazooka squads had multiplied their effectiveness far beyond raw numbers, proving that tactical collaboration, foresight, and unity could overcome even the most heavily armored threats. The battlefield now stood as a testament to how disciplined teamwork could redefine the rules of engagement, setting the stage for the final push of American forces against a bewildered and retreating German armored force. Exploiting weaknesses, targeting vulnerable armor, June 6, 1944. As the morning haze began to lift over the Normandy countryside, American bazooka teams honed in on the Achilles heels of the once mighty panzer columns. Years of armored engineering had created tanks capable of withstanding small arms and artillery shrapnel, but even the formidable German armor was not invincible. Bazooka operators had been trained to recognize the subtle telltale signs: the thinner frontal plates on older Panzer IV models, the exposed engine grates, the unarmored treads, and the gaps around hatches where crewmen adjusted the turret. The soldiers moved like shadows along hedgerows, each step deliberate and silent. Using binoculars, map coordinates, and past reconnaissance reports, they identified weak points in enemy formations. One bazooka team would fix their aim on the engine compartment of a Tiger tank, carefully timing the rocket launch as the vehicle crested a rise, ensuring a direct hit that could immobilize the behemoth. Another team, positioned along a flanking route, targeted side armor where protection was thinner, creating multiple points of vulnerability that German crews could neither predict nor reinforce in time. The cinematic chaos of the battlefield contrasted with a meticulous calculation of each strike. Dust clouds rose from previous explosions, and smoke curled from burning vehicles, but the bazooka operators remained focused. They crouched low behind overturned carts, shell craters, and scattered debris, keeping their sights steady even as artillery shells whistled past. Each rocket's flight arc was critical. A miscalculation of a few degrees could mean a harmless ricochet rather than a catastrophic hit. German crews, confident in their heavy armor, were suddenly forced into defensive postures. Panzer gunners tried to reposition under the sudden threat, but the bazooka teams anticipated every evasive move. When one tank attempted to reverse to a safer angle, another rocket slammed into its unprotected rear, sending the vehicle into a shallow ditch. Flames erupted from the engine, and the surviving crew abandoned the once proud machine, their morale shattered. It was not brute force alone that made these engagements devastating. It was precision, patience, and the tactical understanding of armor weaknesses. Each hit sent a ripple of panic through the remaining German crews. The bazooka team's ability to exploit vulnerabilities turned the battlefield into a deadly chessboard, where every move by the Panzers could be anticipated, countered, and neutralized. By the end of the day, the combination of discipline, reconnaissance, and calculated strikes had decimated entire columns, proving that even the most heavily armored machines could fall to small, well-coordinated units wielding innovation and tactical insight. Psychological shock on German crews, June 6, 1944. By mid-morning, the relentless impact of the bazooka strikes had begun to take a toll far beyond the physical destruction of German armor. Panzer crews, once confident in their near-impenetrable steel, now moved with hesitancy, eyes darting for invisible threats among hedgerows, shell craters, and shattered villages. The battlefield had transformed from a predictable clash of armored might into a terrifying maze where death seemed to lurk around every corner. Soldiers inside the tanks felt the vibration of nearby rocket impacts before they saw them, their senses heightened by the sudden unpredictability of the American infantry. Every creak of the turret, every hiss of hydraulic systems, became a potential harbinger of disaster. Radio calls crackled with frantic reports of tanks disabled or burning, and unit cohesion began to falter. Officers shouted orders, but hesitation spread like wildfire. The once disciplined panzer formations now moved like a flock of birds under sudden attack, scattered and unsure. The psychological shock was compounded by the sight of comrades abandoning burning tanks. Flames licked the armor, sending smoke twisting into the sky, as crew members clambered out in frantic bursts of fear. The deafening sound of rocket propulsion, combined with the thud of detonating shells, created an overwhelming sensory assault. For many, the realization sank in. These were not isolated attacks, but part of a systematic, coordinated strategy designed to exploit every weakness. The fear was infectious, spreading from crew to crew, paralyzing confidence and sapping the will to resist. Even the most veteran panzer commanders struggled to maintain composure. Their pride, built upon years of mechanized superiority, clashed with the brutal reality unfolding before them. Tanks that had once inspired awe among infantry now burned as cautionary monuments to vulnerability. The Americans, moving like shadows and striking with calculated precision, seemed almost supernatural to those who had underestimated small mobile units armed with bazookas. By the afternoon, the psychological impact was evident. Hesitation slowed maneuvers, retreat became disorderly, and fear replaced the once unshakable discipline. It was clear that the Americans had achieved more than tactical victories. They had shattered the mental fortitude of the panzer crews, turning fear into a weapon as effective as the rockets themselves. In the crucible of Normandy's hedgerows, morale became just as critical a factor as armor, and the psychological edge of the bazooka teams was now firmly established. Exploiting terrain and ambush, June 6, 1944. As the smoke of initial bazooka strikes hung heavy over the Normandy hedgerows, the American infantry began to exploit the natural contours of the battlefield with tactical precision. Rolling fields, narrow sunken lanes, and dense hedgerows provided ideal cover for small teams, allowing them to approach panzer columns without detection. Every mound, every depression in the terrain became a potential firing position, a deadly advantage in the hands of disciplined bazooka crews. Soldiers moved like shadows through the labyrinth of mud and foliage, their footsteps muffled by thick soil and fallen leaves. From concealed positions, they observed German tanks lumbering along predictable routes, their tracks cutting deep furrows in the soft earth. Each bazooka team calculated the optimal distance, angle, and timing, ensuring that every shot would target the weakest points, turret sides, rear armor, and exposed tracks. The American infantry had learned that the terrain itself could be weaponized, forcing the superior panzer units into vulnerable positions. Explosions erupted with sudden intensity as the first rockets met their marks, sending armored hulks into spasms of flame and smoke. The confined, narrow lanes amplified the effect, preventing the German crews from maneuvering effectively or returning fire with precision. The psychological impact was immediate. Crews that had previously relied on speed and firepower now found themselves trapped, confused, and under relentless threat from invisible attackers. The terrain that once offered tactical mobility for the Panzers now became a labyrinth of death. Close coordination among squads ensured continuous pressure. While one team fired, others repositioned silently, exploiting the enemy's hesitation and the natural cover offered by Normandy's hedgerows. Rockets streaked through the morning mist, ricocheting off trees, kicking up dirt, and leaving trails of smoke that blurred the battlefield. German armor, so imposing in open fields, became vulnerable in the constricted, hedgerow-dominated landscape. By mid-morning, the synergy of terrain and ambush tactics was undeniable. Tanks were destroyed in sequence, crews were forced to abandon vehicles, and the panzer column's cohesion dissolved under a torrent of precise, concealed attacks. The Americans had transformed every feature of the landscape into an ally, using the very earth to amplify the lethality of small, mobile bazooka teams. What unfolded was a masterclass in infantry ingenuity. Weapon, terrain, and timing fused into a deadly choreography that left German forces stunned and demoralized. The stage was now set for the final collapse of German armored resistance along these sectors, a dramatic testament to the power of strategy, observation, and the audacity of the bazooka crews. Normandy's hedgerows, once mere obstacles, had become the crucible in which the Panzer myth of invincibility was irreversibly shattered. Final strikes and Panzer losses, June 6, 1944. By late morning, the American bazooka teams had turned the Normandy countryside into a deadly theater of calculated destruction. What began as sporadic harassment had evolved into a relentless offensive. From concealed positions behind hedgerows, sunken lanes, and overturned farm carts, every bazooka team coordinated their fire with precision. Rockets streaked through the misty air, striking the vulnerable flanks and rear armor of the Panzer IVs and Panthers. Explosions tore through the steel behemoths, igniting fuel stores, and sending armored hulks tumbling into mud-filled ditches. The sound was deafening. Metal twisted, engines roared in agony, and ammunition within the destroyed tanks detonated in shocking bursts. German crews, many of whom had laughed at the lightweight American weapons earlier in the morning, were now scrambling desperately to evacuate their flaming vehicles. Soldiers leaped from their tanks, faces smeared with soot and panic, while others tried in vain to return fire or call for reinforcements. The well-coordinated American strikes left no room for recovery. Every move the Germans made was anticipated, every weak point exploited. What set this assault apart was not merely the power of the bazooka itself, but the integration of squad tactics, terrain mastery, and relentless pressure. While one team reloaded, another moved silently along a sunken lane to flank the next tank. Smoke from previous strikes hung in the air, shrouding advancing crews and creating an eerie, ghostly battlefield. The combination of visual concealment, careful positioning, and precise rocket fire ensured that even heavily armored panzers were rendered ineffective. By midday, entire columns of German tanks lay immobilized or abandoned, their crews either captured or fleeing into the surrounding countryside. The sheer scale of the destruction stunned both sides. For the Americans, it was a testament to training, discipline, and ingenuity. For the Germans, a bitter realization that underestimated weapons and underestimated soldiers could dismantle the armor they had once considered invincible. The hedgerows, narrow lanes, and muddy fields had become both sanctuary and execution ground, shaping the outcome of this brutal armored confrontation. This decisive morning marked the collapse of German armored cohesion in the sector, demonstrating how small, well-coordinated teams armed with bazookas could systematically dismantle even the most formidable panzer formations. By turning mobility, observation, and precise timing into lethal tools, the Americans had rewritten the rules of armored engagement, leaving behind a battlefield littered with the scars of strategy and firepower. Assessing the battlefield. Tactical lessons. June 6, 1944. As the smoke slowly lifted from the devastated countryside, the full scale of the bazooka team's effectiveness became unmistakable. Muddy tracks led to overturned and destroyed panzers, while scorched earth and twisted metal told a story of precise, calculated destruction. American commanders walked among the surviving teams, notebooks and maps in hand, assessing both success and areas for improvement. Each destroyed tank, every exhausted but disciplined soldier, became a lesson in the evolving art of anti-armor warfare. The once confident German armored crews had underestimated the Americans' ingenuity and coordination, a miscalculation that had proven catastrophic. Commanders studied the flanks of wrecked panzer columns, noting exactly how concentrated rapid fire from multiple angles had overwhelmed armor that was previously considered impregnable. Every squad movement, every timing of rocket launches, had played a pivotal role in transforming a small portable weapon into a battlefield game-changer. In hushed tones, American officers debated terrain exploitation, coordination between squads, and the psychological impact on enemy forces. Hedgerows that had seemed insignificant obstacles were now seen as vital cover, providing opportunities to flank, hide, and strike with devastating effect. Lessons were drawn not only about firepower but about discipline under pressure, patience, and the critical importance of communication between small units. The battlefield itself became a classroom. Scorched tanks and flattened hedgerows illustrated principles of ambush and vulnerability. Lingering smoke highlighted the effective concealment of team positions, and the wide-eyed retreating German soldiers underscored the morale-shattering impact of relentless, unexpected tactics. Every detail, the angle of a rocket, the timing of a squad's advance, the use of natural cover was analyzed and internalized, forming a blueprint for future engagements across the Western Front. By sunset, the assessment was clear. The combination of mobility, precision, and tactical innovation had turned the bazooka from a lightweight, underestimated weapon into a decisive instrument of armored destruction. For the American forces, the battle had confirmed a truth that would guide every engagement thereafter. Adaptability, coordination, and intelligent use of terrain could defeat even the most formidable armored adversaries. The lessons of the day would ripple through the ranks, shaping strategies, building confidence, and ensuring that small, disciplined teams armed with ingenuity and bazookas could continue to dominate in a war where steel alone was no longer enough. Post-battle analysis. The bazooka's legacy. June 7, 1944. The morning after the engagement, the battlefield lay eerily silent. Twisted metal, smoldering panzers, and shattered hedgerows marked the path of destruction, evidence of a weapon that had redefined infantry warfare. American officers and engineers walked slowly among the wreckage, notebooks and cameras in hand, meticulously recording every detail. Each destroyed tank, each scorched flank, became more than a tally of enemy losses. It was proof that mobility, precision, and ingenuity could overturn conventional expectations. Analysts studied the angles of rocket impacts and the positions of bazooka teams relative to hedgerows, noting patterns that revealed how the weapon could neutralize even heavily armored threats. Detailed sketches of panzer vulnerabilities were compared with bazooka trajectories, emphasizing weak points that had previously been considered safe from small arms. Officers discussed coordination, timing, and teamwork, recognizing that the bazooka's power lay not just in its explosive force, but in how disciplined squads could exploit terrain and opportunity to devastating effect. Beyond the technical analysis, the psychological impact on German crews was examined. Soldiers who had once scoffed at the bazooka were now recorded as retreating in confusion, their morale shattered by the rapid destruction of tanks that had symbolized their strength. Reports highlighted the ripple effect of surprise, fear, and uncertainty, lessons that would inform American infantry tactics in every theater of the war. As the sun climbed higher, illuminating the blackened steel and churned earth, historians and commanders reflected on a broader truth. The bazooka had transcended its role as a simple weapon. It had become a symbol of adaptability, innovation, and the triumph of tactical creativity over brute force. The engagement had proven that small, determined teams, armed with lightweight, portable firepower and coordinated to perfection, could challenge the seemingly invincible Panzer. By the end of the day, the legacy was clear. The bazooka was no longer just a novelty. It was an essential tool that would shape infantry doctrine, inspire confidence among soldiers, and forever alter the dynamics of armored warfare. Its success on the battlefield underscored a timeless principle. In war, innovation, discipline, and intelligence could overcome even the heaviest steel, and the lessons learned would echo through every subsequent engagement, changing the course of armored combat for the remainder of World War II.